Solar panels and reducing fossil fuel reliance in Ghana. At the end of this lesson, we'll know what fossil fuels are and we'll be able to identify some examples that are found in Ghana. We'll explain how fossil fuels contribute to climate change and air pollution. And then we'll turn our attention to the main topic here, that is solar panels and how they generate electricity from sunlight. We'll also analyze how solar energy can reduce Ghana's dependence on fossil fuel. And finally, we'll look at the role of solar energy in Ghana's sustainable energy future. Okay, we start with fossil fuels. So, petrol, diesel, and kerosene. They are basically petroleum products. You can generally refer to them as oils. So, these are an example of fossil fuels, which we generally refer to as oils, as I've mentioned. Another type of fossil fuel is coal, which is mined from underground deposits. Then a third example again is natural gas, which we also use in cooking in our homes. All these combustible substances are fossil fuels. An important character of fossil fuels is that they are non-renewable. That is to say that when they get depleted, you cannot replenish them. You have to find a new source of obtaining these fossil fuels. So basically, these are fossil fuels. They are combustible, renewable energy sources derived from the remains of an ancient plant and animals that have undergone geological process over millions of years. And in Ghana, we depend on some of these fossil fuels a lot. For example, we use these oils in the form of petrol and diesel to run our cars and then our industries. We also use coal to generate electricity. In our homes, we use gas to cook, and so on and so forth. All these are fossil fuels. And as I already mentioned, how do we obtain these fossil fuels? These fossil fuels are deep underground. So they are organic deposits that have undergone geological processes over millions of years, and then we turn into these fossil fuels, and then humans extract them for various purposes. Using fossil fuels is not without its problem. One of the problems with fossil fuels is that they generate carbon dioxide and also trap methane in the atmosphere. These are referred to as greenhouse gas emissions, and these lead to climate change and global warming, where you can have high temperatures in the atmosphere. These high temperatures sometimes lead to wild bushfires. You can have situations where a whole plantation can get burnt, and that happens because of excess release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So that is one problem of using fossil fuels. If we're using petrol, if you're using diesel, and then just as we see in cars, a lot of smoke comes out from the exhaust, all gets into the atmosphere. They lead to what we call global warming. Then another thing too is that they lead to air pollution. Some of these gases that are released from the combustion of fossil fuels include sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. These are harmful to the body, and when humans breathe them in, they can develop some respiratory diseases. Then thirdly, they lead to environmental degradation. Because fossil fuels are deep down into the ground, humans will have to sort of degrade uh, the earth in order to have access to these fossil fuels. In doing so, they destroy the natural habitats of these organisms that live deep within the soil. They also pollute water bodies because within deep down the soil there are water beds there, and sometimes they use some of these water bodies to wash or engage in some of the manufacturing processes in producing fossil fuels. It also leads to the contamination of the soil. So generally, a third problem with fossil fuel is that it leads to the degradation of the environment. And as I already mentioned, it leads to climate change. And climate change is a very critical global situation that the world faces, because there are countries that have highly industrialized, and because of that they produce a lot of emissions into the atmosphere, and this can really change the climatic um, situation of many countries, such that you will not even able to predict your weather pattern any longer. So these are some of the environmental challenges of using fossil fuels, and hence the need to find an alternative source of energy apart from these fossil fuels. And here in Ghana, we rely heavily on fossil fuels for our transportation and also in our industries. And then secondly, we buy these fossil fuels or oil from other countries that have them. And when these prices go up or come down, they affect our energy security. Now, let's do a comparison between renewable and non-renewable sources of energy. Non-renewable sources of energy are the fossil fuels. We say they are non-renewable because when they get exhausted, they cannot be replaced. You have to go and look for another deposit somewhere else. So non-renewable sources of energy, example is coal, oil, and then natural gas. So if you have, let's say, a large oil deposit in somewhere within the western region and it gets finished, you have to look for another place where some is. So a disadvantage here is that it is finite, that is, it will eventually run out. Then secondly, for you to form a new one or for a new one to form, it takes millions of years. So countries that have these fossil fuels have it because they were formed millions of years and then they are enjoying the benefits today, not that they did something to gain it today. Then thirdly, they produce greenhouse gases and then pollution, as we have said, which can also contribute to climate change. So that's about non-renewable sources of energy, which we say fossil fuels are a major part. Then we come to the other side, which is renewable sources of energy. Renewable sources of energy are naturally occurring. So example is solar or solar energy. The energy that comes from the sun, called solar energy, is a renewable form of energy. We say that because it's always there. So every morning to evening, the sun is up and then it's giving us the energy, except during brief moments of the night time where we don't have it, but the following morning you have it. So it's renewable and then it continues for the lifetime of the earth. So it does not deplete over time. It produces little to no pollution. So the energy from the sun does not lead to any pollution as we see in non-renewable sources of energy. Then it's also sustainable for future generations. So examples again of renewable sources of energy are solar, wind, water, and geothermal energy. Okay. So because of the negative effects of using fossil fuels, there is a need to take advantage of the renewable sources of energy. And in this lesson, we'll be focusing on solar energy and how to take advantage of solar energy, or how to harness the power of the sun to generate electricity for our use. Now, to do that, we would need a device called a solar panel. So with a solar panel, we'll be able to take advantage of the sun's energy, and want to do that because it's clean and it's renewable. And why are we advocating for solar energy for Ghana? Why are we saying that we should gradually transition from using fossil fuels to employing or using solar energy? So, one advantage is that we in Ghana are located at the equator, and at the equator we have abundant sunlight, which is consistent year round. So all year round we have abundant solar radiation hitting the earth in Ghana here. And so because of that, we need to take advantage of the energy that we're receiving from the sun. Then secondly, it's clean. As I already mentioned, there are no greenhouse gases, and there is also no air pollutants that are produced when the sun is giving off its energy. Then thirdly, it's renewable. Then fourthly, it's a local resource. That is to say that we generate them here, or we're able to harness the power of the sun to our advantage in our country. We don't need to depend on a foreign country to import oil from there, and that becomes an advantage here. And then thirdly, it's scalable. We can have it in our various homes. We can have large solar farms where we generate for a national grid. So these are some of the advantages that solar energy is going to offer we as Ghanaians, and why it's strongly advocated that we transition from using fossil fuels to using solar energy. Let's look at how solar panels work, or how they generate electricity. So the solar panel is made up of what we call photovoltaic cells. These photovoltaic cells are made up of silicon. Silicon is a semiconductor. So when the sun rays hit this photo cell, the sun rays comes in packets of energy, or they carry packets of energy, which we refer to as photons. So when these photons hit the photo cells during the day when the sun is shining, the electrons within the photocells get excited. And as they get excited, they begin to move. When they begin to move, a current is generated. And that current is basically your electricity. Now, that current is in the form of direct current or DC current. And you would need an inverter to convert the DC current into alternating current or AC current. And AC current is the standard form of current that we use in our homes. So after you convert the current from DC to AC current, you would now need to distribute it to your homes or wherever that you need to use it. So basically, that is how solar panels generate electricity. So if you want to set up a solar panel system that will generate electricity for you, these are the components that you need. You would need some solar radiation, which of course comes from the sun. Once you are in Ghana, everywhere there is sunshine. Then you need your photovoltaic cell, which is basically the solar panel, which will generate the DC electricity. Then you need an inverter. An inverter too is a device. It will help you convert from the DC to the AC. Then you need an electrical panel that would distribute the AC current into your home. So this will basically include some wiring and electrical components. And then fourthly, you also need battery or a grid that will actually store the excess current that will be produced from the solar panels, because during the daytime there's excess amount of sun, but during the evening time the sun is no longer available. And so when you are in the day, you need to store some of these excess power in battery, so that maybe during the nighttime you can use it. So you need some battery setup to store the excess power. So these are the components that you need to have in order to have a functioning solar electricity. Okay, so this is how solar panels reduce fossil fuel reliance. So as we have said, this lesson is to encourage we as Ghanaians to transition from over dependence on fossil fuels to employing solar panels in generating the generation of electricity for both our homes and our industries. And when that happens, we say that there will be local energy generation. So solar panels produce electricity locally, reducing the need for imported oils, which will decrease Ghana's dependence on global fuel market. When we begin to produce solar electricity, it means that we are not going to buy fossil fuels as much as we do. And importantly, these will be a locally generated energy, because the sun is shining on our country every time of the day. And another important thing is that it's going to help our environment, because there'll be no greenhouse gases emission, and there'll be no pollutants in our environment. It's going to help us achieve energy security, because our energy supply will not depend on global fuel price fluctuations, and so we'll have energy security in that sense. So that's how solar panels are going to reduce our fossil fuel reliance. So where can solar panels be installed in Ghana? So we can install solar panels on our rooftop. So once you have a building, you can put some solar panels on the roof. So in your homes, and then sometimes in your commercial buildings. So the benefit is that it utilizes the existing space. You don't have to put up any special setup or use any new space. It's already your existing space that you are using. Then secondly, you can have solar farms. These are large scale installations on land that produce a significant amount of electricity, usually for storage purposes. Then we can have industrial sites that also use these solar panels, and we can have rural areas who are not on the national grid or do not have access to the national grid, but have large amounts of solar energy coming to them, as we see in the northern part of the country. So they can install or set up some of these solar panels to enable them generate electricity. So these are some of the places where solar panels can be installed. Then let's look at the environmental benefits of solar energy, which I have said over and over again. So I'll just go through them. So it reduces greenhouse gas emission. It improves the air quality because there are no pollutants, as we see when we are using fossil fuels. And then it reduces respiratory diseases and other health problems. Then, under biodiversity protection, because we are not going to dig down into the earth, we are not going to destroy the land, we are not going to destroy the habitats, we are not going to have oil spills, and we are going to keep the natural ecosystem. Then this energy too is sustainable, and it's almost there for future generations to use. So, what are some of the challenges in having a solar panel setup or using solar electricity? Even though we've spoken nicely about the advantages of using solar energy and having a solar electricity in your house, it doesn't come with its downsides. There are challenges to putting up this setup. So first and foremost is the fact that you don't have the sun 24/7. There are times even in the daytime where it's very cloudy, and because of that you don't have the full strength of the energy coming from the sun. That is why it's important that you have batteries that can store the energy when the sun is in its full strength. Then the cost involved in setting up and installing these solar panels is very huge, especially when you are doing it for the first time. And that becomes a challenge for people who may not have much money to create that infrastructure. Then, to produce large quantities for storage, we need to invest in our great infrastructure to do that. We also need engineers who are trained and understand how these solar setups operate. And that will mean that we bring educational programs or vocational training that will equip these technicians to be able to do this work. Then, when we want to build solar farms that will produce large quantities of solar electricity, we will need a vast amount of land, and that too becomes a challenge when we want to transition to solar electricity. So even though it's interesting that we can take advantage of solar electricity or solar energy, these are some of the advantages that we would have to address as a country before we can fully take advantage of solar electricity. Even though we've highlighted they are not without solutions, there are solutions that are available. And once we are committed as a people, we'll be able to realize these goals. Okay, so that's about this lesson. So the main points to take away is that fossil fuels are non-renewable and contribute to climate change and air pollution. Secondly, solar energy is clean and renewable, harnessing Ghana's abundant sunlight. Then solar panels generate electricity through photon excitation and electron flow. Then solar energy reduces fossil fuel reliance by providing local clean power. Then economic opportunities, including job creation, reduced cost, and technological innovation, are some of the advantages of using solar electricity. Then environmental benefits include reduced emission, improved air quality, and climate action. So these are some of the main summary points. So a little discussion for you. So I have 6 questions here that you can discuss among yourself in groups. Okay. Then finally, the future is solar. We are encouraging the Ghanaian government to gradually transition from the use of fossil fuels into the use of solar panels or generating of solar electricity. And you know why? We've spoken about this advantage over and over in this lesson. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the comment section. Bye for now.